Sir Ranulph Fiennes is probably one of the greatest British explorers that we have heard of in recent history. His official website lists a number of expeditions that he's completed, some of which I'm just going to list now. But bear in mind that I have deleted 13 from the official list that his website provides. 1967, the Jostedalbreen Glacier Expedition. 1979 to 1982, the Transglobe Expedition. 1991, the discovery of the lost city of Ubar. 2009, Everest Nepal Summit. He became the first person ever to summit Everest and cross both polar ice caps. 2015, Marathon des Sables. He becomes the oldest Briton to take part in the toughest foot race on Earth, in aid of Marie Curie. Along the way, he has raised funds for charities like the Multiple Sclerosis Society, British Heart Foundation, Marie Curie, amongst others as well, raising in excess of £14 million as he's done so. It's not hard to feel a touch inadequate when we think of someone like Sir Ranulph Fiennes and what he has accomplished and done, and think, wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. What a sense of accomplishment over challenge. What a great spirit of adventure in outdoor pursuits. Just remarkable. There are so many challenges in our world that need to be overcome. We can add to that today the coronavirus and what we're all learning from it. Maybe there's issues of greed in our culture and our world, or conflict and war. Maybe others too that you're aware of. I'd like to humbly suggest that our biggest challenge doesn't lie somewhere out there. It's not separate to who we are, but it actually sits in here. It's intrinsic to our being. But I'm fine. What are you talking about? I do good things. I'm a nice person, and I've never got a speeding ticket. But are you on loving terms with every person that you've ever met? Can you go back to every single friendship, relationship, even acquaintance, and just pick up a conversation with them without there being any sense of awkwardness, or without there being any sense of tension? Just how good are we? And how are we defining good? The biggest challenge of all, with no disrespect to Sir Ranulph Fiennes, I probably couldn't do all that he's done. The biggest challenge of all is getting to grips with the mountain that sits inside of us. And that's what we're going to unpack a little bit more as we go forward. Sometimes we think we've mastered it. Other times we stand at the base of that challenging mountain and we just look up and think, how is this going to happen? And sometimes we think, oh, I've got this, I can do this. But we might not. It's not as simple as just diving in and going for it. There's something wrong with the challenge itself. That means that it's always doomed to fail when we try to do it in our own strength. Try sailing a boat with a hole in the bottom. You'll soon realise that it's not going to go very far. Well, all right, Mr. Pessimist. How does your negative turn into anything positive? Well, I'm glad you asked. It all starts with the thought and the recognition, It all starts with the recognition that God is faithful. How can God be faithful in the midst of a global pandemic? Tough question. But in the midst of the chaos and the difficulty, that's when we would affirm most that God is faithful. In the first chunk of Romans chapter 3, verses 1 to 8, Paul is addressing an issue that's been influencing the Roman church over the years 56-58 AD, and maybe before as well. In a nutshell, Paul is saying that despite how God's people treated God's law before Jesus, God was faithful then. And he's faithful afterwards. He is faithfully, relentlessly, unendingly, unswervingly faithful at all times. His faithfulness is not contingent upon our ability to be faithful. Even when we've pushed him out to the sidelines and said, we'd like you to do it this way, He is still faithful. This alone makes me want to do a little jig, but not so keen on dancing on camera, if that's all right. But if I had to give everyone a penny for every time I made a mistake, I would have been broke years ago. My faithfulness is inadequate. God's faithfulness is complete. It is so complete, and he is so whole that he is unable to be faithless at any point in time, even when I let him down. Perhaps you feel justified in resisting God because of something that happened in the past. Perhaps you've been a believer for many years, and after a number of knocks, you feel that you are doubting God's faithfulness. The inward turn that can result from either of these two positions is a risky one. And it's risky because we stand at the base of the mountain and we look to see what kit we have around us. But we don't notice, and we don't ask God for what's in his crate, the one that's just sat behind us and is able for us to use, but we don't feel able to ask if he would lift the lid and let us see. But that's not necessarily fair. Well, if God is greater than a human being, I'm not so sure that we can demand of him answers in relation to our expectations as human beings. It's humbling. It's challenging. But on the other side of the humility is the spiritual truth that we are looking for. For us as a congregation, we've heard a number of things about God's faithfulness over the past few weeks, but let's remind ourselves to do two things. Firstly, to continually thank God for his faithfulness over the years, and secondly, to be honest and say sorry to him when we know that we've been unfaithful, and to one another as well, when we know we might have done something that has let our church down. Dare we ask him to challenge us to greater humility and obedience to him than we have before? I hope we can. I hope we will. The first step for taking on the biggest challenge is to acknowledge the faithful God who is always watching and always attentive and always wise. Come on a journey with me for just a moment. Just imagine that you have travelled all the way to the South Pole, thousands of miles, and you've just disembarked from either the boat or the plane that brought you there, and you're standing looking out over the landscape. You take a deep breath with the excitement of realising that the journey that is ahead of you is full of adventure. And then as you turn around to wave the ship or the plane goodbye, you stop and you look and you suddenly realise that your crampons are inside the bag that you left on the vessel. You don't have the grip to walk on sheets of ice in your walking boots without those crampons. What can you do? No one has any spares, and the rendezvous point where you're being picked up is 100 miles away. To make matters worse, the second day in, your ice axe breaks, and you can't grip if you need to go up steeper inclines, and you're pretty vulnerable now. What can you do? It's a pretty dreadful feeling. We can't fix anything. You have to press on. Your expedition will have to compensate for your lack of speed. The list goes on. It's just a nightmare. Romans 3 continues in verses 9 through to 20 to set out a similar tone. The argument here is about being able to achieve a right standing before God through a zealous form of religious adherence. There was an expectation in the lives of some that by keeping all the laws and all the requirements, they would win brownie points with God. That would make them righteous. And yet Paul levels the playing field, and he says this: all are under the power of sin, as it is written, there is no one who is righteous, not even one. There is no one who has understanding. There is no one who seeks God. In their 2005 song, It's My Life, Bon Jovi wrote these words in the chorus: it's my life and it's now or never. I ain't going to live forever. I'm just going to live while I'm alive. It's my life. My life is like an open highway. I think I said I did it my way. I'm just going to live while I'm alive. It's my life. It's a song about taking life by the scruff of the neck, not being put in your place, standing out from the crowd. It's your life. It's a song about being justified from within. I'm justified to do whatever I want in the way I see best, perhaps. In some regards, it captures essences of the postmodern world. Authority structures can be questioned, and even if the wisdom to be found in the voice of many counselors is available, why not just reject it? After all, I'm justified by me. I don't need to seek after God. And this is the biggest challenge. Can we deny self-justification and step into the justification of God? Everybody who claims after righteousness based upon their merits, of their ability, is missing God's point. We can't do it our own way. God is too holy and too other to who we are that we cannot reach him by our own efforts. If you want God to step into and speak into a situation, it won't be because we have impressed him. God is compassionate, for sure, and smiles favourably upon the kind and the generous of our world. But ultimately, there is still something missing. The crampons are still in the bag on the boat or in the aeroplane that's going over the horizon. For no human being will be justified in his sight by deeds prescribed by the religious law, for through the law comes the knowledge of sin. We need the Bible to help us to see how at times how broken we are, how much we seek our own desires, to wrestle in our minds with the truth that we are not God's. It's not my life in an unfettered autonomy kind of a way that says I am literally free to do everything and anything I choose. And God is not able to accept my unholiness. I have a choice. You have a choice. If you're listening today and you do not believe in Jesus, please remember one thing, that you can't get to God on your own terms. This is the heart of the biggest challenge, the self-justification. To say, I am justified, and to stand before God and look at him and say, I am justified, but on my own terms. The two will never combine. The two will never happen. This is the challenge. How do you move from being seen by God to having God delight in you? We'll come to that in just a moment. If you're listening today and you are a believer, are you trying to win God's favour through being religious somehow? Tougher still, and always a point for reflection. Do we limit God's glory by controlling our lives in such a way that we might limit what God is able to do? I don't know about you, but I am delighted that the challenge doesn't stop here. This moment of what looks like a nightmare of a situation is not the end. And in fact, it's only the second step. The second step in moving towards what God has for us. So God is faithful despite human efforts. No one is legitimately right in standing before God in their own efforts or on their own terms. So how then do we get out of this mess? Romans 3 continues. Let me read some words to us. There is no difference, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. God presented him as a sacrifice of atonement through faith in his blood. He did this to demonstrate his justice, because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his justice at the present time, so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. In a brief nutshell, if you want to achieve the biggest challenge in all of human history, it can only be done by letting Jesus into the picture. If you let him into the picture, the promise is simple. All the issues that come by not being able to stand in God's presence are dealt with. The God of compassion has made it possible for you and I, by a free gift. What in this world comes free? What in this world is legitimately free at times? And yet God gave his Son as a free gift to be to you and I. And he gave it so that we're able to bypass all the things that might rightfully discredit us before God, before a holy God. I cannot be justified by myself, but Jesus can justify me in the presence of God, before God. I get the delight of God for the price that Jesus paid. Win. It's an incredible win. I paid nothing. Literally nothing. And yet I've got everything. It sounds mind-bending. You might even say it sounds crazy. But if you want to overcome the biggest challenge in life, finding God and staying connected with him all hinges upon Jesus Christ. The Bible brings us to him. Its wisdom is prescient for our world. The issues of mistakes and wrongdoings and choosing our ways over God's ways, what we would call sin, are all there. And the Bible gives us an awareness. As Paul said earlier on in the passage, the Bible shows us what sin is. But faith is what brings everything to life. That seed of faith in our hearts. Yes, the world is complicated and messy, and things don't always make sense. And sometimes God is quiet when we would like him to be loud, and other times God is loud when we're asking him to be quiet. But how is your faith? Do you need to start expressing faith? I believe the faith of God can meet you where you are, as he meets with anyone who says, I am a follower of Jesus, wherever they are. There may be billions of galaxies in our universe, but better than any GPS tracking system, God knows who you are. He is conscious of you and what is going on in your world. The biggest challenge isn't necessarily that we can achieve what we can achieve in our lifetime. It's whether or not we can wrestle the I out of the word justified and end up just being fed. Just fed in Jesus. Christians of many years, don't you just love that? Don't you just love that the more you give up yourself, the more you receive back from Jesus, the more he fills your life, and the more he enables you to be a joyful, peaceful, contented being, human being in our world? Don't you just love his ability to restore? Don't you just love the way he can calm storms and wash away sins? The mistakes that you made 3 months ago can be washed away. The mistakes that you made 30 years ago can be washed away. Do you love him? And if you don't know Jesus, the full love of God and everything that I've just described is available to you as well. It's on the other side, though, of accepting that we can't save ourselves. And maybe you're tired of trying. You've tried everything, and yet somehow you know that something just still doesn't quite match up. The biggest challenge offers the biggest reward through the humblest of gestures. Being justified by Jesus. Taking your eye out of the picture and being just fed by him. We're going to reflect for the next few moments, and the song is going to come up after this video in the playlist. It's a song by Phil Wickham. It's called Living Hope. It's a song about all that Jesus has done through the cross and all that he can do and does for those who will accept him. For those who will say, Lord Jesus, will you justify me before God? Because I recognize that I can't climb that mountain. I need your resources. I need what you have. So let's listen to the song together. And may God bless you as we listen.